And it is our great privilege and honor to introduce Jenny Sawyer. Jenny has worked in the area of enrollment management and student services for over 40 years. Over 38 of those years, she has been in multiple roles in the U of L. Jenny earned her BA in political science of U of L, her master's in the college student professional from Bowling Green State University in Ohio. Her career started in orientation and first-year program at Spalding University. After several years, she returned to her alma mater to direct orientation programs for new students and parents. For over 2 years now, she has directed the Office of Undergraduate Admissions and has responsibility for a wide range of areas, including recruitment, transfer services, dual credit, and much more. In addition to her roles at U of L, she has served for multiple terms on the board of Family Scholar House, a nonprofit that assists single parents in earning their first college degree. Jenny currently sits on the board of the Lincoln Foundation, a Louisville-based nonprofit that offers outside of school academic achievement and college readiness programs for under-resourced youth. So Jenny?
Thank you, Shara. So now you've made me, I was nervous to begin with, and you've made me a little bit more nervous with that introduction. But I hope that the takeaway for the audience is that over the course of my career, I've had the great privilege to work with several nonprofits that serve low-income, under-resourced, underrepresented students. And so, you know, that has given me a lens of how the community looks at higher education and how we prepare students for transition for college, whether or not that transition be right out of high school, after community college, after stopping out, and coming, you know, single parents coming from all different walks of life. Also, because of the breadth of our office, I really do get the opportunity to see how student success, student transition, transfer credits, particularly as it relates to dual credit, how all of those things interact with the work that we do. So,
Jenny, I think we need to let Jennifer do the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I just jumped right in. Jennifer.
That's okay.
Ready. You can tell we're all ready for you, but pause for just a minute, Jenny. So we'll put some more excitement. This is like a you know, one of those like long pauses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Shara, for introducing Jenny. We're so very fortunate and appreciative to have you both with us today. My name is Jennifer Fraker, and I currently serve as the Executive Director of K-12 Policies and Programs at CPE, and I'm also happy to serve as your moderator today. But now, even more importantly, the time has come where we want to hear from you. So you'll see on the screen a QR code. If you have a phone that has a camera, you can launch the camera app and frame the QR code, which should take you to the poll. If anything, and you all may not agree with me, but certainly one skill that I've improved throughout the pandemic is becoming more adept at using QR codes. But as a safety net, I'm going to drop in that link into the chat as well. I said I was. Here we go. So it should be in the chat as well. So you've got two ways if you want to use the QR code or the link. Either way would be great. While you're getting things pulled up, we'll pause briefly and certainly give everyone a chance to complete the poll. And as I said earlier, just as a reminder, the feedback that you're going to provide in the poll, it's really going to help guide the establishment of the breakout room themes that we'll have here in a little bit. Hey, it looks like we're getting lots of great feedback. That being said, I think we'll go ahead and move on and continue to feel free to put the feedback in the poll. Thank you for everyone for your feedback. We'll work really quickly behind the scenes to identify the themes that you've put in there. And again, those will establish our breakout rooms. But now, Jenny, after our long awaited pause, it's my privilege to turn things over to you as we start to dive into the topic at hand. So Jenny, take it away.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later, but I do want to start out by just making sure that we're all kind of using the same language when it comes to test optional. So, discussions about in institutions, we saw, as I think that one of the earliest schools I saw was in 1969, as I did a little more historical research for today, moving to test optional, and it was very slow until recently. The largest institution that was really shocked everyone and really actually could be held kind of responsible for getting more institutions to seriously have discussions about test optional was when the University of Chicago moved to test optional. But I just want to make sure that we're all kind of using the same language, because I think one of the things that we all struggled with is that when the pandemic hit, over 3/4 of the institutions across the US quickly pivoted to test optional. And some of those institutions were in the midst of research. They were already debating this on their campuses. They already had work groups looking at that. And then some of them, this was like a brand new thing that they just had to do quickly. So I just want to make sure. So test optional is actually a blanket term that is used across institutions when institutions either do not require or play down the use of test scores in their admissions process, okay? But when an institution specifically uses the word test optional, it's because they've given the student choice in whether or not they want to submit test scores or not. And typically those test scores are what we think of, and that is the ACT or the SAT. And that choice has caused a lot of students and families to have confusion, because I, every day in my job, see students with really high test scores who go test optional, and it's nothing more than they thought it was the thing to do, right? So I'll talk a little bit more about student confusion a little later. Text flexible is a term you're going to hear, and that is when an institution gives students some type of flexibility as far as what test to use. And then some institutions are actually using some placement instruments as one of those text flexible instruments. And they pivoted to that because there are some other test instruments out there, not ACT and SAT, that are available to the general public, not in person, but computerized and virtual. And then test blind is those institutions, and Western Kentucky University here in Kentucky is an example of an institution that actually moved test blind prior to the pandemic. They do not review test scores when looking at scholarships, most scholarships, or in admissions, even if the student submits it. This is embarrassing, but someone came and opened my door because I have a pretty open door policy, and now they're getting noisy outside my door, so I'm going to quickly close it, okay? If I have back-to-back meetings all day, sometimes I don't get back up and open my door, and then a student will stop by and say, Jenny, I came to see you and your door was closed. And I'm like, well, everybody just needs to open my door. So anyway, I apologize. So one of the things, and I think Shara is going to put the link in the chat, one of the things that I would refer you all to is the task force that NACAC, the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, had over the past year that really examined enrollment operations and how standardized testing plays a role in that. and what are the practical reasons for those roles and the ethical reasons about why we may not want to use standardized testing. So I would really, that is probably, of all the resources I've found, it's probably the most comprehensive document on this topic. So if you're looking for something to give you a good overview, to give your institution some guidance, to give you, if you're chiming in on your campus on this topic, I really do recommend the NACAC report. It actually began as a task force prior to the pandemic, and they were looking at the general use of test scores in the admissions process and how it caused inequities. And what is the appropriate use of test scores in enrollment operations, and then how can they be misused in the admissions process? And so I encourage you to take a look at that. It is primarily admissions representatives from institutions of all types. There are some community-based organization members on that task force, but I encourage you to take a look at that report. Okay. So one of the things I did in preparation to today is I polled the admissions directors at the public 4 years in Kentucky. And now that we have all been through almost a full cycle of being test optional, what were the things that we saw were positives as we've gone through this year, and what are the things that we've seen as the greatest challenges? Okay. So before I go into that, I do want to, and I noticed, and I think this is probably because at a great many schools in Kentucky, they are on spring break this week, but I noticed as I scrolled through, just about everybody on the call is from a four-year public, or at least the large majority. But I do want to just draw a little attention to the critical role that the secondary schools play in assisting students and assisting universities with our recruitment process, with the students' college search, and with increasing the number of college-going students in the state of Kentucky. So, you know, they play that critical college counseling role when they can. We all know that college counselors that high school counselors, school counselors wear many, many different roles, but they work very hard to play an important college counseling role. They play a role in FAFSA completion, getting students to do their college applications, getting them to be aware of deadlines. They host us in their buildings, and they've hosted us in virtual ways, but we know that's been challenging this year. They help students register for their college exams. They help facilitate low-income students, particularly getting fee waivers so that a student can take a college exam. And then one of the things that has probably impacted us this year the most, and it's one of the things that actually played a role in the institutions all going college test optional, is most of our high schools administer the test on national test days. So not just the school day test that is administered in the public schools and in most of the private schools in Kentucky, but just all the national test dates. So most schools did not allow testing. They closed down testing completely in their buildings because their buildings were closed. Some of the universities continued to administer tests, but the capacity for those tests was greatly diminished. And so as we entered this year, we saw significantly either 0 test scores that students had or 1 test score. And we're used to seeing where students would have taken the test multiple times. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of the positives. As we look at our applicant pools right now, we see that we do have a more diverse applicant pool. And that is more underrepresented students and more under-resourced students. That has even been for institutions that have less selective standards. And I think one of the things we have to remember is, even when institutions have fairly open admissions, when you still require a test score, there is this narrative about the test and how you need to perform on that test in order to go to college, to get the scholarships, to be able to afford college, and to be successful in college. And so some students, if they see that first test score and it's not what they consider strong, they don't apply either to any schools or to certain schools. So by removing that test score barrier, we saw students who typically would not have applied to college or would not have applied to some colleges file those applications, sometimes in very large numbers. There's also a judgment associated with test scores, that when a student saw their test score, they all of a sudden just made it impacted their self-esteem about going on to college. And our students in public institutions really didn't get to benefit from that this year, because they did, in most cases, unless they were sick or they were waiting on accommodations, most of our Kentucky public school students that are seniors right now did take the test last March, right before we shut down and went to shelter in place. Now, there are many states across the United States that have school day testing where that did not happen. And so those students in those states had no opportunity. And depending on testing abilities in those states, those students have been unable to test all year long. Okay. So I just, I don't think we can minimize how, when you look at test optional admissions and we take away that requirement, how that impacts the student and how they feel about their preparation and how they feel about what access to higher education they have. So that's the positive on the applicant side. And obviously for the institutions too, because we got more diverse applicants. For institutions, and I hear this every day from our admissions counselors that are reviewing files, we feel a real freedom from those test score constraints. Because you need to remember, for institutions, test scores play a role in their rankings, they play a role in their image, and we all struggle when we see a test score, how that we might be judged when we make a decision to admit a student, even though that student might have higher grades. What does that say? Are we missing something? Are we making an ethical decision if the test scores say maybe that student is not prepared, has not had his rigorous curriculum? Are we setting that student up possibly for failure? So I know at the University of Louisville, we had a process by which a student, regardless of their test score, could get accepted to the University of Louisville. But it was a much more rigorous process than it is now. So now when we're not even looking at a test score, we are immediately looking at grades, we're looking at curriculum. If there's personal statements, letters of recommendation, we're looking at those. We're looking at the school profile so that we see the context of the school. We're immediately going to those things, and we're not having that constraint of looking at a number. Any questions about the positives or anything else anyone else wants to add right now about the positives? Okay, well, I'm going to move on to challenges, because whenever you have to pivot to a whole new process, of which we had decades of setting up our processes based on including test scores in both admissions and scholarships, we have faced many challenges. I got a lot more challenges from the institutions, to be quite honest, than I did positives. Okay, so the first challenge has been consistency. We had to very quickly train our staff on how to make holistic, student-centered decisions that take into effect many, many factors. And so, we all come to our job every day from a different background, from looking at students through a different lens. And so we know that we have struggled with consistency. And that is something that I think we will all dedicate more time to as the school year winds down, as our application numbers get smaller, and as we have the summer for training. We will all look back at this year of applicants and really look at where do we need to strengthen our training for more consistency in decisions. Access to scholarships. Not all schools have pivoted totally away from test score requirements for scholarships. Okay. For many schools, they've pivoted away for some smaller scholarships, but for our most competitive and our scholarships with the largest amounts, particularly in Kentucky, most of us still have some type of test score requirements at those highest levels. With limited dollars and with budgets the way they are in higher education in Kentucky, it makes it difficult for us to decide how we're going to distribute those dollars with so many test score optional applicants. And we have at the University of Louisville, about 1/3 of all of our applicants this year have been test optional. So if you're looking at 15,000 applications, that's 5,000 applications that you're trying to do a holistic student-centered approach, which are individuals reviewing those files. So that did impact our workload this year. For scholarships, also, institutions have very sophisticated algorithms that help them determine who will accept scholarships based on test scores and grades. And when you take away that test score requirement, it does make us a little anxious about our budgets and our scholarship budgets. So that's something that has impacted us on the institution side. Some institutions have pivoted during the middle of the year. So we just, we saw as our test score optional numbers went up, that we needed to, both for purposes of yielding students and for purposes of student affordability, that we needed to pivot, and we needed to find a way to roll those students, those test optional students, into our scholarship dollars so that we could equitably award them awards. If our school counselors were on today, I think they would say that the confusion that applicants and families have had and that they have had has been the greatest challenge. Admissions offices do not roll out these guidelines. We administer guidelines that come from our faculty. And so, in addition to educating ourselves about the best way to do this, we had to educate faculty. And we've all probably had more meetings with faculty and presenting with faculty, Senate. And sometimes then we're trying to take, what are they telling us they want us to do in order to select the right students for their schools and colleges and our universities? And how do we then translate that into language that is easy for our families and our applicants and for our guidance, I keep saying guidance counselors, I'm not supposed to say that, our school counselors to understand. And as public universities, one of the things that we've tried to do, we've met once a month. We usually met twice a year. We have met every month as public admissions directors this year, just so that we could stay abreast of what we're all doing, so that we can help school counselors, so that we can help applicants understand what is going on. Now we're coming on that time of year where we go out and talk to junior parents, and that is when it's really hitting us, that to try and talk to an audience of junior parents and junior students and talk to them about how every single four-year public institution in Kentucky is implementing test score optional, it's overwhelming. And if it's overwhelming to me, and you all saw, I've been in this business for 38 years, imagine a first-generation family member sitting in an audience and trying to make good decisions about that. So I do think that one of our goals, and one of the things we are all working through right now, is how do we start to make sure we're using common language? How do we have common FAQ pages? How do we give our school counselors and our applicants some type of template that helps them make good decisions about whether or not to go test score optional or whether or not to apply with a test score? How is it going to impact their scholarships? How is it going to impact their ability to be able to choose an institution as they factor in affordability and cost? This next one, I think I saw that Jeff Bailey from our Reach and office is in the room today. Every single public admissions director talked about student success as they talked about challenges. And, you know, we had a year to pivot and make decisions, but we have a shorter amount of time to make sure that we get good information on our students and that we place them in the appropriate first-year classes. And if we are going to do this with placement tests, which is what the state of Kentucky requires right now, are we right back to some black and white number that then puts a student in a class and impacts their curriculum, impacts maybe how engaged they are in a class if they're misplaced, impacts possibly how they feel overwhelmed right away, or maybe how they don't feel challenged. So we have spent at the University of Louisville a significant amount of time over the last 2 months talking through how do we communicate and how do we help students understand their placement for their first year courses, because there is so much data out there that shows about how critical that is in their student success. The thing that I struggle with about placement is it's going to take us several years of data to look and see what we've done right as far as accepting students, but more importantly, what have we done right about putting students in first year classes? And when we don't do that, it is not just 1 year of students that are lost. If we don't do that well, it's several years of students and their student success and their graduating on time and their amount of loan debt that we have lost. So we had to commit ourselves to the assessment of our data, the assessment of our placement test instruments, our first year placement, our grades, and then our success in subsequent courses. We have to commit to that assessment, because that success is what's going to tell us whether or not we're making good, holistic, student-centered decisions, and whether or not those decisions are leading to student success. So that does make me very anxious that it's going to take several years of data, because we're going to have to, it's going to be 4 full years before we have first year students entering that were not impacted by some loss of learning. And so how do we factor all of that loss of learning into how students then transition? And what are we going to look at as far as recovery programs, loss of learning types of programs that might help close that gap? I just want to, and Jennifer, how am I doing on time?
You're good. You're good.
Okay. So, I do want to close by just talking a little bit, just in summary about, what the research says about using test scores, in decisions. Okay. So almost all of the research that has been done tells us that high school grades are the best predictor. But it also tells us that the better predictor than test scores. But it also tells us that when you take a high school grade and when you take a test score and you combine them, you do get a slightly better predictor. Personally, what I think we have to guard against is, are there greater risk by pulling test scores back in and having better prediction, but having more students who bring other things to our campuses and help us educate more students who come from underrepresented minorities and from under-resourced populations and brings them to higher education, brings them through the pipeline, and then brings them out the other end with better paying jobs and contributing more to the Commonwealth. So I think it's that balance of those 2 questions. So what did you say, Jennifer, about my time?
You're good. We're coming up here. You've got just a few more minutes.
Okay, that's fine. Let me just double check and see. One thing I didn't mention was that, we do have some unintended consequences. And, if we all stay test optional, and one of those does come down to grades and concerns that some people do have about grade inflation if schools remain test optional. Will there be, are our secondary schools in a position to really if we're going to weigh like dual credit courses and AP courses, are our secondary schools resourced to really scale up, their dual credit opportunities? Do we have the teachers to teach dual credit courses? Do we have, are all our schools in a position to offer more AP courses? And I think that's where that lack of transparency also comes in. It becomes very difficult for parents and for school counselors to advise students when we're making holistic student-centered decisions. And so, it's just like anything, there's trade-offs. So, what I would encourage, all of you all, because you really do see this as I look at all your different roles you play, you see this through different lenses. So, I encourage you at each of your institutions to really, reach out to your directors of admissions and see how you can be involved in helping us assess these new processes, sharing with us what you're seeing, if you see changes of who's sitting in your classrooms, or if you even in your own community circles, if you see where we can do a better job with how we articulate to students how to navigate the college application process and the college search process. It's already challenging and difficult. And there's many people on this call who are part of the groups right now that are looking to make that simpler. We don't want to stay test optional and make it more confusing and more difficult for students to navigate it. So please give us feedback and help us as we navigate all of this change and prepare to move in. It won't be long before we're moving into a whole new application cycle in August of 21. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Shara.
Thank you, Jenny. Wow, it's hard to talk after that. That is for sure. But thank you for helping us to consider the issues facing admissions in light of these policies today. I think everyone that's in college admissions or even school counseling, especially in light of the pandemic, as we all know, what a crucial role and a crucial time that this is facing the ability really to promote student success. So this importance, along with the issues being faced, really bubbled up in the Mentimeter feedback. Accordingly, the themes that surfaced were as follows. So transition to post-secondary, kind of broad category, which incorporated things from affordability and readiness, but we're just going to call it transition to post-secondary. That's one. The admissions process, which kind of encapsulated the process in general, college visits and so forth. And then the third theme that really broadly popped up was test optional policies and implications and kind of all the things that fell in there. So as a result, our next step is that we're going to create 3 breakout rooms labeled according to those 3 topics. And so to give you kind of a preview, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to assign each of the breakout rooms with a note taker. So I will be assigned to the transition to post-secondary breakout room. Jenny's going to be assigned to the test optional policies and implications breakout room. And then Shara is going to be assigned to the admissions process breakout room. So just to clarify, our role as a note taker in these rooms is merely to capture the highlights from your discussions in the room and share those notes when we all return from our breakout rooms, and then obviously to serve as the timekeeper as well. As I mentioned earlier, the structures of these rooms, it's very much like an unconference. So you're driving the discussion with the exception of course, we have to do this. We're going to throw in a few guiding questions that we'll pose throughout our time together. So to give you a sense of the questions, just so you can frame, get a better frame of reference and prepare, those guiding questions are as follows. So what is the current situation as it relates to the topic? Collectively, where are we going? What is the goal? To reach our goals and objectives, what must we do? Accordingly, what data will we need? What partners should be at the table? What are the potential obstacles to implementing this? And how do we overcome those obstacles? Then to what extent will these actions guarantee our success? And what will measure our process? But don't worry, I promise we don't expect you to remember all of these. Your note taker will help to pose these questions throughout our discussions. So at this time, if there's no questions, and I'll pause just a second for questions. Okay, with that then, I will display the breakout rooms and you will have the option to join the room of your preference. And just as a matter of timekeeping, so we're all on track, we're all going to come back to the main room at approximately 2:35 Eastern time. So don't worry again, your note taker will help with that and reminding us to do that as well. So let's see. It should go ahead and we'll look forward to seeing you in the breakout rooms. So you have the option to join which one you would like to. And if you have any questions, feel free to
It
reach.
took me a minute to find it. I was
Okay,
like,
good.
okay.
I'm glad it worked.
Yeah.
I see people are joining the rooms. We still have several people not joined. I'm going to go ahead and join the transition to post-secondary group. So see you all back at 2:35.
Hey, Cindy.
How you doing?
Good.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the transition to post-secondary breakout room. I know, Kim, I'm not supposed to say much, but you all have to humor me. I want to know more about you before we begin. So I might give you a slight nudge and say, if you're willing, I would love to see your smiling face. The other thing I'm going to ask you to do, just because I love a good Mentimeter poll, I'm going to ask you to engage in just a super quick exercise called, where are you joining from today? Just so we get a sense. And you know probably a lot of the people in this room, but I don't. So you have to humor me. I guess that's one of the things that you can do to people when you're the moderator, right?
Yes.
Okay, let me drop this link. And hopefully it'll work. You see the Mentimeter link in the chat. Oh, I see. We've got some results. Can you all see the results as you're entering? No, it won't let you. Oh. Then we've got some suspense. So we've got Richmond, Lexington, snowy Lexington, April Fool. So clever. Covington versus.
It is April Fool's, isn't it?
It is. Northern Kentucky, Bowling Green, Murray. Murray, I think you win for farthest away, right? That'd be the farthest. That's awesome. Great. Thank you all for indulging me. And who's from Murray? Just so we know who wins the furthest away.
It's me, Kim Archie.
Kim, you're the winner. All right, well, here's where I be quiet then, and I let you all get started on your conversation. So the first question to consider as you consider the topic at hand is, what's the current situation? So what's going on? What's on your mind in terms of the transition to post-secondary? Lots of different things that kind of bubbled up. So I'll be quiet and I'll just take notes from here on out.
I'm Kim Drummond. I'm the executive director of Gear Up Kentucky. I know several folks in here. I thought Jenny did such a great job of touching on the issues, and several that really kind of resonated with me around transition and, the point around the clarity of information that we're providing for our students and families while we're still trying to figure this out. To hear her say that was really compelling to me, because she is a veteran in this, and obviously has a strong network across the state. And so, just to hear that, the struggle on her side of things was just really eye-opening for me. And, that's certainly what, and, Cindy and Mark can speak to, working with students on the other side of that and trying to discern, navigate through that. So that was an issue that, really kind of resonated with me.
Yeah, I'll speak up. I'm Cindy Jolly. I'm with Gear Up, and I am located in Fleming County in Flemingsburg, Kentucky. And working with seniors this year has been struggle, as we all know. I've done this for 8 years, and this year has been very challenging. One of my main things that I deal with seniors and their parents or guardians, we have so many, at a high school level, we're not just dealing with, okay, all the students that's going to one university or all students that's going to a specific school. So we try to keep up with what's going on with a lot of universities and colleges and trade schools. So it's a lot for someone coming from the high school spectrum to try to keep up with all the changes that all the universities are taking, trying to undertake. So the representatives that I work with from those colleges and universities have all been wonderful. And we just tell each other we're all trying to get through it together and give our students the best information possible. So I know that it's difficult for each individual college and university, but working with many students, going with many, many different directions and trying to keep up with what each of those colleges and universities are doing new this year has been quite challenging. We try to give the most informed and correct information we possibly can. And when we do that type of advising, it's a lot to keep up because all colleges and universities are doing such different and diverse things. So it's been a challenging year, to say the least.
Hi, friends. I'm Jeff Bailey. I'm at U of L with Jenny. And I think one of the biggest things that we're trying to get our hands around is, what we do with the number of test optional students who are going to require additional placement testing, such as AccuPlacer, which is what we use here. Primarily because, we lack an alternative pathway to properly assess whether or not they need our intervention coursework or not. And we need to ensure that we're not just simply having students enroll blindly into these classes. It displaces the students who truly do need those intervention classes and the dev ed types of remediation that many of us are engaged in. We also know that there are realistic issues with delaying students getting into their credit bearing classes if they have to start with us first. So we want to make sure that we appropriately place everybody. So that's impacted a lot of the work that Jenny and I have been dealing with lately, particularly with different faculty, but also even with her admissions recruiters, clarifying questions for seniors who are saying, I'd just rather take the class than take a test. And we're thinking, okay, wait a minute, you could spend $15 on taking a test or $4,500 on taking 3 intervention classes. Let's see which is the better math decision. So we're facing a lot of those struggles and convincing people of the merits of taking acuplacer so that they don't waste their time, they don't end up at classes they don't need, and that we appropriately help them make that transition to college.
I'm Mark Presley. I'm with Gear Up, along with Kim and Cindy. I'm the district program coordinator. My schools are Frankfurt Independent Schools. And Jeff, along with what you said, and also Cindy, a lot of the things that we're dealing with is, of course, the transition from high school to college this year. It's not normal. Let's just all face it. One thing that I was very happy to hear about as far as the ACT. I'm gonna use Frankfurt for an example. Frankfurt is one of the few schools that actually you can come in as a freshman and start taking dual credits. We have 2 seniors who will graduate with associate degrees this year. So that's a lot of credits. So obviously they can do the college work. I use my son, for example, on the other way, which he had studied for the ACT going into last year. He's a senior this year. He had studied for the ACT. He was ready. The first time he took it, the day he was supposed to take it, they sent him an email and said, your seat has been filled, even though he had the ticket. Second time he studied for it, the same thing. The third time he studied for it, the same thing. Basically, he spent his entire summer studying for the ACT. So I said, you know what, your GPA is good enough. Let's use that. I don't want to put him, I just didn't want to put him through that again. I couldn't imagine of, studying basically the summer to take a test for a placement. And I didn't do it. I took the SAT. I don't even know if the ACT was around when I was in school, to be honest, which it's been a long time. But it's just that normalcy. And I know that COVID has definitely been devastating, but I honestly think that something good will come out of this. We all going to learn a lot from this. And I can see in some things already, there's going to be some good in this somewhat. Thank you.
Mark, I think you make a really good point. Long term, what are we going to do? And that's not a decision we can make lightly or in the immediate time frame, because we have to really utilize not only some of the evidence and data that we're collecting, but also prudently ask ourselves, in the long run, does it really matter if they have an ACT or an SAT score? I think of Dr. Duckworth's research at UPenn with grit and resilience, and she's demonstrated that those metrics actually have greater validity and reliability in terms of predicting whether a student stays in school. One of the best examples she has is with West Point and whether a cadet is going to be successful making that transition from high school to college. I think it's time we probably face up to the fact that there are going to be other psychosocial and psychometric, options available to us that could either replace or at least augment and give us a better picture of whether or not a student is going to be successful. Because I've seen plenty of honors and AP and IB students who make the transition to college, and they make the same stupid choices as any other traditional 18 or 19-year-old. It doesn't preclude them from making those mistakes. So, I think, we have to ask ourselves, what's ultimately going to paint the picture of whether they're prepared, because it's more than just passing a particular test or having a test score.
Right. And along with that, Jeff, is like I tell some of my students, you'll never take another test like that again. Those results do not make you. I think I can speak for all of us. We have a lot of students that just cannot test under that type of pressure. And I hate when they get the results down, you know, they could have a very high GPA, everything is looking good, they're ready to go to college, and all of a sudden they get a 14 in the ACT. That can really just ruin the psyche of a teen. I'm just going to be honest with you. And I've seen it happen. And of course, with the COVID and the mental issues that the children are going through right now, that doesn't help. It doesn't help at all. So my son was able to enroll in the college. He's very happy of where he's going. He's also playing a sport. And I'm so happy for that because he's a child loving to death, but he has ADHD. And the way that he has handled it, Cindy and Kim know this. I'm gonna just go ahead and tell y'all, showing a very strong young man who's 18. He lost his mother last year from cancer. I was diagnosed with cancer this past summer. I beat it, thank God. And he saw his aunt pass away last year in a room. All of this within 1 year. And to have a 4.3 GPA, I couldn't be prouder. I could not be prouder. But we all have to say that, you know, we have a lot of students who don't have that support. And I think that's very important for us to try to reach those students. You know, it's a lot to go through.
My name is Amy Gass, and I work at Gateway Community Technical. And I'm jumping into the conversation because I previously worked in an educational talent search program and now am at the community college. And it's so interesting from my perspective to talk about testing because I was a really good high school student. I was in math, honors, and science classes, all that kind of stuff. I did very well during college too. My SAT score was above average, but it wasn't really, really high. And yet I graduated from college and graduate school with a 4.0. So the fact that test scores have so much impetus on how kids end up placing, and I understand for scholarships, I do get that, but really that does not determine how the students truly are going to function. I think we all know that by now, but you know, they live so much and they worry so much about what kind of score they're getting that they may not be pursuing other things that would benefit them in the college variety, you know, when they get to college. So I just think the test scores they're really not important. And I hate to say that, but I really think that they don't serve any use at this point. That's just my comment.
I am Shauna King Sims with KCTCS, and I have personally for a while now been convinced that GPA carries with it some of that grit measure that Jeff was talking about earlier. Although it's hard to convince faculty of that. And I would also add that we see community colleges across the country who are now beginning to go to a self-placement model for students. And so, you know, we're really interested in the placement issue and the college readiness concerns that COVID has kind of brought to the forefront, and what institutions are thinking of doing, perhaps in the way of summer bridge programming and other things to move to address that college readiness issue and move these students into credit-bearing coursework sooner rather than later.
Shauna, you said a self-placement model. I have not heard that term before. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Well, you know, it's basically the the test-free admissions model, where community colleges are basically just through kind of an advising model, talking to their students and asking them, what course they think they're prepared to enroll in.
Gotcha. Okay.
And anecdotally, I hear that a surprising number of students will self-place themselves lower rather than higher.
That's interesting.
Which is unfortunate as well.
So I don't know if we have any faculty members in this group, but you also said something, about just the faculty perspectives on GPA. Is that due to just the wide range of what GPA looks like across school districts and not knowing what the curriculum that's attached to that? What is the concern? If anybody can speak to that, I'm just curious.
My sense is that faculty don't respect GPA because I always hear the anecdotal pushback is that we've had valedictorians coming to us and assess via a placement test into remedial coursework. And then I just have to bite my tongue.
Hey, Shauna, I want to say something to that. When I was at Eastern Kentucky University, I was a transition coordinator, and I worked with kids who were in 504 plans. And when I would go speak to, say, for instance, if you had like a recruiter that would come to a school, they would ignore those kids, okay? So a position was designed for me to travel throughout the states. I had 50 counties that I went to, was very proud to, do my spiel and speak to these students. And I think I've told Kim and Cindy this and my colleagues of Gear Up that I can honestly say like 2 years ago, I saw two of my students graduate with their masters in health sciences with a 4.0. Okay. These were students that were told that they wouldn't amount to anything. So you say that like a lot of professors, they don't respect the GPA. When we had some of these students that were in grade school, they had GPAs of like a 2.3, 2.4 and graduated from master's in OT, which is one of the hardest. It's only 2 colleges in the state that even have an OT program, and both of them came out with the 4.0. So it can be done. And I go ahead and say it. I'm not for the ACT. I'm not for the SAT. I would never let a test tell me how smart I am.
Kim Archie with Murray State Talent Search. I have to agree with the information or with the idea that the ACT shouldn't be a sole indicator. My son took the ACT and he was a 4.0 student all through high school and did not do well. He has test anxiety and he knows he has test anxiety. And then, he is currently a junior in the meteorology program at WKU and he's doing quite well. He doesn't have a 4.0, but calculus kind of kicked him kicked him a little bit. But he's still got a 3.7, I think. So I agree. I don't think that the ACT is a good indicator on how hard a student is going to work once they get into college. And I hate that students take the ACT and then they don't think that they're good enough to get into college if they're not a good test taker.
Yeah, I agree. And working at the level that Mark and I work with students, we're there with those juniors when they go in to take the ACT, and like I do ACT tips and strategies for all the juniors before they ever take the ACT to try to alleviate some of those stresses that they have. And through the years, I have always thought, man, I wish we could just do away with this ACT, because I've had students, good students, was going to be phenomenal at something someday, and just could not get the ACT score to get into the college, university they wanted to go to. But at the same time, I understand the value of it, because if you take it away, and students can just go to any school that they want to sign up and go to, we take away that one thing that students have. We have students that study and they work hard and strive to get those good scores. And so are we taking that away from those students, that drive that they have? Because if everyone can go, why bother? It's kind of like if you give everyone a lollipop for being good, or you give everyone a lollipop for being bad, everyone gets one. And so there has to be a medium somewhere. I don't have the answer for that. I wish I did. But there has to be somewhere where there's accountability, because everyone needs accountability. And we have to find that. I don't know what it is, but I know that we have to find it, because colleges, universities are missing out on brilliant minds over a score. And they're missing out. And so who suffers from that? We all do. There could be a student out there who, can end cancer, that didn't get into the school they wanted to go to, so they gave up. So there has to be something. I don't know that answer, but we have to find a middle ground between the ACT, and you can get in with a score, and ACT, you can't get in with a score. And I'll be more than willing to help with that if anyone has any ideas.
Well, Cindy, say for instance, with I'm just going to use Frankfurt students. Say like if you got 9 or 12 credit hours in reading, math, science, and English, okay, and all of them are from an accredited university, and you pass all those, say with 3.0, 3.2, et cetera. What's the purpose of taking an ACT then? Couldn't you just use that alone? I mean, obviously they can do the work. So I'm saying, like, if you have like a certain amount of credit hours, then a university can accept that, okay? If they didn't have that, then maybe they need the ACTs, and then, you might have the students who just have like perfect 4.0 or 4.3, et cetera, once you calculate the dual credit classes in. So I'm not saying take it away, but it definitely should not just be based on the ACT.
And Mark, I can't speak for the universities, but in the KCTCS admissions and placement policy incorporates the opportunity to exempt even placement testing for students that come to us with having successfully earned credit hours and transferring them in English and math and gen ed to address the reading expectation. So, I'd be surprised if the majority of our post-secondary institutions didn't have that kind of an opportunity built into their policies.
Yeah, I wish that they all did. That would be wonderful. But I've had students from a 3.5 up to 4.0 plus who just could not get that ACT score, and so they just couldn't get into that college, even though they had wonderful GPA, and were hardworking students. They just couldn't get into the college that they, it's just their dream college. And so I just hope that in the future, post-secondary can all come together, or at least someone can come together, and we can look at these students who just cannot get the score they need on those tests and say, hey, they still deserve to go, to this school. There has to be something other than just an ACT score determining your future. One score determining your future is giving that one score a whole lot of power over your life.
And perhaps dual credit is part of the answer to that. If they come with transferable credit hours, that could replace, or in the case of the KCTCS policy, replaces the need for a test score.
And I think one other thing that long-term will probably get better over time is going to be the predictive analytics platforms that can take into account not just test scores, but GPAs, factors like grit and resilience, or other metrics that we determine all play a key role in whether or not somebody's going to make that transition successfully and be able to stay in school. There are always going to be factors, though, that crop up. A student has a bad experience. It's not a good cultural fit. They don't form a niche community. There's not an opportunity to develop belongingness at that institution that will drive them to a different school. But to the extent that we can control some of those predictive analytics, those will get better over time. I think the struggle is whether or not an institution can either, one, afford those platforms, or two, have the expertise in-house to be able to craft and build those. And honestly, on each of our campuses, we probably know which students are going to be successful more than products. I'm going to bust on EAB, that EAB can actually tell us. But I've never met a predictive analytics platform that is worth its weight yet. But I think it will get better over time.
And they are pricey, as you touched on.
We also have to address the fact that if the GPA is not there, the ACT score is not there, the SAT score is not there, but you might have a coach involved. So I'm going to address that elephant in the room. That happens a lot, more than what we think, in all sports.
I've been having this kind of ongoing conversation with different colleagues about the impact of this. And someone said to me the other day something that I hadn't really thought about, and I would love to get, the perspective on this from the admission, like Jeff, yours, and the other folks that are dealing with that admissions. Because, Cindy, I'm very much like you and of the same mindset of you and Mark. Like, I don't want our students identified by a number. And then they challenged my thinking and said, okay, so then what if our students are being evaluated on a portfolio that includes extracurricular activities and things that our low-income students may not have had the opportunity to do, to be able to put forward as a portfolio? Is that an unintended, outcome of this that disadvantages them just at the same time we think we're finally advantaging them?
Kim, I'm glad you said that, because I have to use myself. Those of you who don't know me, I'm a professional artist and graphic designer. And along with my scores, I also had to have a portfolio. So it pretty much doubles the work. And not only that, now that was over 30 something years ago, but it's pretty expensive as well. So Kim, thanks for bringing that up. And today I'm working with a student right now who wants to be a graphic designer, and he chose me as his mentor. And I told him, along with his grades, he has very good grades, but I'm teaching him how to build a portfolio as well. So because there are certain schools that when you go in, they want to see that. You can have the best grades in the world, but if you're not creative and they can't see that, now all of a sudden, that ACT, it looks kind of easy now compared to that portfolio, which is going to take some time to build up and an expense at that.
So I'll interrupt, even though you guys have great momentum. We have about 15 minutes left. You guys are, I didn't even have to give you questions because you've nailed it. We're kind of at the point in the middle of actually our discussion questions. I think we've looked at kind of the data. You've been talking about the data that we might need to move forward. I think you've looked at dual credit and some other things, and whether it's a platform or otherwise. But I think the next piece is what partners should be at the table. If something like this were to go forward within Kentucky, who should be at the table?
Jeff, you need to answer this.
Thanks, Mark.
Y'all, I don't even know Jeff, but it seems like we've known each other for a long time.
Well, I mean, I think a good place to start certainly would be the, the college readiness leads that already exist. But honestly, I'd bring admissions officers to the table as well, because they are interfacing with parents, with students, and they can share the real stories behind what's happening in their lives. And probably at no other time in recent history is that more important than right now, between the pandemic, the forefront of social justice issues. I think just the recognition that there are realistic limits to things like standardized test scores. We need to have comprehensive voices at the table. And I think those two populations in particular probably have greater insights, because we're kind of the first line of interfacing with those student populations, even before they get to, faculty, advisors, student affairs professionals. So.
And the thought just occurred to me that we've kind of left the adult learner out of this conversation to date. The adults that come to us without GPAs or GPAs that have occurred in any time frame that anyone's willing to consider, and how to deal with those folks.
Very good point. Matt Bergman, bring him to the table. So, talking about life experiences, folks who have military experience and being able to exchange that for credit hours, that real life type of experience that honestly is probably more genuine and applicable than whether or not you can pass that. I'm going to pick on it, just a random class, an introductory philosophy class or a sociology class or whatever, as they transition into the university. I think figuring out a methodology for that's acceptable to faculty. It tends to be more limited right now to colleges of education as a general rule of thumb.
Yeah, I know in KCTCS, we need to do a much better job with credit for prior learning. And it's kind of a heavy lift, but we know we need to move down that path.
I'm going to jump in and say, I think when you're talking about bringing people to the table, probably the first people on our list should be our students. So many times, listen, I've been around this block many, many times. I've been around a while. And we, as adults, make a lot of decisions for young people that we think is best, and we never take the time to ask them what they think is best. So if you're going to put something together, bring in your people from CPE and your groups that, post-secondary, your admissions advisors, bring in people like me who work in the high schools with these students who are trying to prepare them for you, and then bring in your students. And I don't mean just your 4.0 plus students and your 36 ACT students. Bring in those students who I work with every day who struggle, and ask them what they need, and ask them what we can do to help them get to where they want, because they also have dreams and aspirations. And, we might be really surprised and educated at the same time about what we can learn from them on what we can do to help. So it's just one of my things. It's my soapbox, okay? We need to always remember to ask our students when we're making decisions for them, We can advise them. We can give them our educated opinion on what's best for them. But sometimes we need to ask them what's best for them. So I would say let's bring a group of them to the table as well.
And I would add to include your GED graduates and adult learners.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Cindy, because I share that heart. And Jennifer's heard me talk about this. Shauna, we've talked about it for a long time, right? The need to connect on a regular basis the folks that are working with our students before transition and after. That was our heart of this event. But especially when information is changing all the time and differing from institution to institution, how can we set up formal networks and formal communication channels that are student-centered, but that are connected across the system to get to giving our students and parents the information that they need to make informed choices? So, I mean, if I think about partners, that's, CPE obviously has a leadership role to play, right? As does our counseling associations, our financial aid associations, our college admissions associations. Like, we've got to stop talking to each other and start talking across on a regular basis.
I can't remember who brought this up earlier, but somebody had referenced the summer bridge programs. I think collectively, when we're talking about transition, particularly for the most vulnerable of our student populations, no matter whether they're traditional age or if they're adult learners coming back to school, figuring out cost-effective ways to be able to offer this. And, frankly, I'm not convinced that the online experience for that is the right call. I think getting people, obviously, we have to get past the pandemic, but certainly fostering those opportunities in person where it is something that the students really recognize the value of their time and effort and participation. Because otherwise, I think it's too tempting. I mean, I probably wouldn't have done it, going to college. I would have said, no, I'm not giving up my summer. I'm going to, go make money, to help pay for what I'm going to be doing during the school year. So if we can make it, cost effective on our ends, from the campuses to be able to host, as well as provide incentives, whether that's scholarships or other, means of financial support for students to make it worth their while. I think that's going to go a long way towards easing that transition. That could be academic, it could be, psychosocial and cultural. It could be a combination of those things.
So I'll pose this question as well, moving on from partners. And you've touched on some of it, but what are the potential obstacles to implementing or changing to something more like this?
Could you clarify that? Something more like what?
Yeah, something like, well, what are the obstacles to moving towards policies that are not really just aligned to ACT being the only assessment? Does that make more sense?
It does.
I think if I understood your question, Jennifer, I think you need to include race in there as well. It matters, and I don't see it on the other end, but trust me, I know it's there.
And the thought that came to my mind was, having enough student success data to strongly support a move in this direction.
And the other piece that I already heard you say previously, and let me know if you still agree that it belongs here, was getting faculty on board. Okay.
Yeah, and I think, Shauna, I think you spoke to this too, but also an alternative way to make sure that our students are placed in classes where they can succeed. Whether that is, your AccuCheck or whatever it was that you mentioned, Jeff, whether that's other kinds of placement tests, but, making sure that we aren't putting, by doing so, by intending to open doors of opportunity, we aren't setting students up to fail. So we still, can have a good holistic understanding of their readiness and be able to place them in at levels where they can succeed. So I think it seems what I'm hearing is different institutions are still using different things, and that makes sense. If we're looking towards, moving to something that is consistent across the board, then we're going to have to, we don't want to replace something with the same thing that's going to put students in a box. So for me, that's still an unanswered question.
Well, I'll just take advantage of this opportunity to mention the EdReady model. That's a different model for assessing and placing students that we've had at least a couple of our colleges experimenting with for the last couple of years. Where EdReady is a tool whereby a student can take the initial assessment based on how they score on that initial assessment. It generates, I guess, much like AccuPlacer, it generates a customized study path. So we have established placement scores that are attached not just to that initial assessment score, but also a second set of placement scores attached to students who work their study path. So that, in that model, a student can basically choose what level of coursework they want to begin in based on how much time and effort they're willing to put into that study path. And I really like that model. And like I said, we're still kind of experimenting with that.
Can you share which institutions are doing that, Shauna?
Well, Gateway and Somerset,
Okay.
all of our colleges have had access to that in the past, but Gateway and Somerset seem to be the two that have embraced it most enthusiastically. And we're still trying to collect student success data in those Gateway courses, enough of that to make a strong statement one way or another, but we've asked CPE to recognize that as at least a KCTCS readiness tool moving forward.
Gotcha. Thanks for sharing that.
I think the last question that we'll propose is, it reads, what will measure our success? So whether that might be looking at enrollment data, or what are your thoughts there? I think this is really our success towards moving towards, a more comprehensive admissions policy, right? So what measures our success?
Well, on our end, it's pretty much success in those Gateway credit-bearing courses, English, college level math, are the big ones.
I mean, I guess my brain goes first to, graduation rates of our low income students, and more students from low income communities getting in, but also getting through. That's how I measure success for us in Europe. And this admissions has everything to do with that.
Yeah, you're right, Kim. And that success in the Gateway courses, I guess, maybe the first
if they're
momentum,
not successful there,
maybe the first momentum point in
yeah.
graduation and completion. But absolutely,
yeah.
Okay, I think we're down to the minute mark, the final minute. Any last thoughts before we move back to the main room?
What a lovely group of people to chat with. I thought we got the best group. I don't know how that happened, but did you pull some strings, Jennifer?
Yeah. All right, I think we're all back. Well, welcome back, everyone. I hope everyone had super productive and thoughtful discussions. I know my room most certainly did. As it turns out, actually, we ended up with only 2 breakout rooms, test optional policies and implications, and also transition to post-secondary. So that being said, our next point on the agenda is actually tasked on the note takers who will share out generally the answers to the guiding questions captured during the breakout room. So with that, let's turn over to Jenny, and I'll let you share kind of some highlights of your group's discussion.
Jenny, you're muted.
Yep, it's brilliant. I have no doubt, but we can't hear you.
Okay, thank you. I'm done. No, I'm just teasing. What? So we were kind of all over the board, and it was just 4 of us. So we really just talked in general about, you know, some of the challenges, and a lot of our conversation really did pivot to student success, and how this, you know, how the pandemic took us to test optional, and then test optional is going to take us to needing to, you know, to be able to measure student success, and those you know, what are the things that we have to do and put in place in order to make sure that our students are successful. One of the things that I did not talk about in my presentation, but we talked about, was the fact that, you know, this isn't just about incoming freshmen applying to college. It's also about the large number of students in Kentucky we have that we're trying to decide if they're eligible to take dual credit classes, and what are the right dual credit classes for them to take. And so everyone had to kind of scramble to how do you, and that just jumps right to that placement, because what dual credit class you can take is really a placement decision, right? Is a student ready for English 101? Are they ready for college algebra? So anyway, so we talked a little bit about that. We had to use letters of recommendation. Some of us used placement tests. Some of us trusted the faculty, the lead faculty members on saying, so it really was all over the board. And then Kenneth from KSU joined us, and he is the Dean of Graduate Studies, or the interim Dean maybe of Graduate Studies at K-State, and really talked about all the discussion that's gone on at the graduate level with more and more programs, even before COVID, wanting to waive the GRE. And how does that impact the decisions of who gets into what graduate programs, graduate fellowships, things of that nature. So they've had a lot of discussion at KSU about that. For some graduate programs, they don't have that flexibility because GRE scores are actually required by their accrediting agencies. So it's not always up to the institution. Marjorie, do you want to explain a little bit about what you all did at Elizabeth State when it came to prior to the pandemic, when you all you had you were allowed to let 3.5 students be considered without a test score? Do you want to explain that? I thought that was fascinating.
We're a small HBCU, and we were given permission to allow a percentage of the incoming freshmen as a pilot study, but they had to take the test anyways, but it wasn't part of the decision making if they had a 3.5 or above. And then we had to follow them through to graduation. And if the student had a 4.0 at the end of the semester, because we had some of your similar performance funding indicator, if the student was able to maintain a 4.0 after the first semester, then we could fast track them to, so for some of them, there were 3-year graduation rate. Some of them graduated in 3 years because they were able to take up to 21 hours as long as their grade point average was. We have that in our catalog, that they had it in, I say we, I keep saying we, I keep forgetting where I am. The catalog has a provision for the students to take an overload if they have a 3.25. So that's in the catalog. So we would just encourage them to do that. And some of them graduated in 3 years. So that helped the overall graduation rate for the university because you had these fast track students. And then you had this pilot study for students who did not have to worry about just relying on the test score if they had a grade point average at 3.5 or above.
Thank you, Marjorie. And then we did talk about a fair amount about the different performance metrics. And as we begin to assess admitting students without test scores, you know, what are all the other complexities of the lives of our students that play into student success? And whether or not that be their mental health, their personal health, family situations. Kenneth told us a story about a student who was just excelling. And then when the pandemic hit, they actually found out about, and everyone was asked to move out of their residence hall. They began to unearth some other struggles that this student had that they needed support for. So, you know, so one of his points was, as we measure these, we often talk about the benefits for low income students, underrepresented minorities, but you know, some of these benefits apply to all students across, you know, all spectrums. And then we did talk a lot about the importance of helping a student find the right environment, and that many of these students who maybe are not strong test takers, when they're in a different environment where they're nurtured or they're in a program that allows for significant nurturing, a student who maybe didn't have as rigorous a background, where maybe that is why they didn't score well on a test, you put them in the right environment with the right faculty member and the right nurturing, they will find a way. They will be resourceful. They will use your university resources and they will be successful. And how do we put together student success initiatives that we measure and that we adjust to help students be successful? So those are some of the, when we talked about data, we did talk about the importance of measuring our DWF rates. But also not forgetting to measure some of those long-term things that measure student success, and that is like our job placement rates, percentage of students applying, participating in internships, things of that nature will be important to include as we evaluate the data for student success.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. I think there were lots of parallels between this group and the transition to post-secondary breakout group, especially because the conversation really hinged around the notion that ACT shouldn't be the only predictor of student success. So, you know, and then coupled with placement, which has been a huge impact and can potentially delay students taking credit-bearing classes. And in some cases, it was even pointed out that students don't want to take the placement exam. So how do we fix that as well? So lots of parallels again, collectively where we're going, again, how to move from the ACT not being the sole indicator, trying to really figure out what really matters. Looking at, again, Jenny, as you pointed out, kind of the complexity of our student lives, but also things like grit and resilience, as well as GPA, which might be better measures that really give us the best picture of whether a student will be successful and or kind of what other supports might be needed for our students. Especially this came up, there was a lot of conversation around test scores today might not be nearly as important as they have been in the past, just considering, back to your point, Jenny, again, the complexity of our lives right now within this pandemic. So really factoring in all those other aspects. Let's see, moving over to our objectives. We talked about exploring opportunities to evaluate policies and what do we really do about students who just can't get the score that they need? So how, back to your point, how do we really help students find the right environment and be successful? As far as data, we kind of lingered in the space around dual credit. So are there other things that could be looked at, for instance, like dual credit? If a student's taking dual credit courses and doing really well, is there a need to really use an assessment score to evaluate the likelihood of success? Could it be that institutions are using platforms to look at the different metrics of whether students will be successful? We talked about kind of the expense of this, or if there's other systems in place on a campus. And then we talked a little bit about our adult learners that come in with no GPA and what to do with life experiences. We talked a lot about kind of the need to get back to leveraging the importance of credit for prior learning, things that may be deemed more genuine. So what's the methodology that's going to be acceptable to faculty? When we talked about partners, we talked about really ensuring that there's comprehensive voices at the table. Lots of talk on really putting students first, as this is a policy and practice that really impacts students, making sure that they are first and foremost kind of leading that discussion. And this really has to include our GED graduates and adult learners as well. We need to hear what they want and what they need. Also involving college readiness leads, admission officers, and school counselors, those that really can share the real stories about what's happening behind our students' lives, what's important, and what's going on during the pandemic. Potential obstacles, we talked about, things like race. We talked about having enough student success data. We talked about getting faculty on board, and then we talked about placements. So kind of, as you can see, it really was a large span. And then we kind of ended on talking about how do we measure our progress? How do we get to where we want? And looking at kind of those indicators, certainly success in gateway credit bearing courses and the graduation rates of our students. And I pose this back to the group if there's any other things that you think I failed to mention, I think, but as you all can see, I think there's lots of parallels. Jenny, is there anything else as we kind of wrap up our session here that you might want to bring light to the conversation that we haven't addressed so far?
I do think that as we move more into test optional, there's going to be more of a need. I want, as higher education folks, I want you all to think about this. How do we get our faculty to have more conversations with high school faculty? So there is alignment. And so for years, we've lived in many ways in these two worlds. So the college faculty have certain expectations of what a student must know. The high school faculty, they have their expectations or their curriculums that they're following, that particularly in public education is very structured, right? With the curriculum and the content. And in my opinion, I don't know what you all see. Maybe you see examples. Marjorie, you've been some places where you're doing some really creative things. So I'd be interested in what you all have done in North Carolina. But I don't know that I see where we bring those high school and college faculty together. I'm not going to say Paul's last name. How do you say Paul's last name, Jennifer?
Zarpada.
Paul Zarpada has talked about this multiple times in our Commonwealth Education Continuum, and that is some of the things that we attacked as a state a decade ago, having to do with four-year colleges accepting the work of community college students so that community college students could seamlessly move. We need to start to have those same conversations with K through 12, and particularly our general education faculty, particularly in key STEM areas and mathematics areas. So that's my 2 cents to end the conversation.
2 cents that was worth way more, so much appreciated. Okay, so that really kind of brings us to our closure of our breakout session. And let me make sure that I get you all in the right place. So I've got some links and things to kind of direct us back. But truly in great sadness, it's time for our time together to kind of come to an end. And so our next step is to return to the main Zoom room, where I, along with the other moderators, will share the highlights of our discussions. And I'm it's amazing how many parallels. So I really appreciate your insight. So together collectively, we'll kind of discuss our key takeaways and connections. So a couple options at this point. You can certainly find the link to the main room, Zoom room, on the conference agenda webpage, but just kind of for simplicity, I'm also going to drop the link into the chat now. So while I'm doing that, again, thank you for spending the time with us in our session. We certainly look forward to seeing you back in the main conference room. And with that, I'll drop the link, and happy e-travels to the main room, everyone.